Lena lay in bed. It was early morning in July. She lay on Ben's side of their bed, looking at their wedding picture on the nightstand. She often lay on his side of the bed, reflexively, just laying, breathing, listening to her house with her eyes closed. She was on leave from work since the Monday after that terrible confrontation with her sister. She spent those many days cloistered inside. She showered every few days, she dressed, she ate small and careless meals. She hadn't answered the phone in a week. She spoke to Poppy briefly and tersely after she left Eva's studio that night. What was the $50,000 for, she demanded. Poppy asked, "What 50,000?" and she hung up the phone. He called back again and again. Harmon phoned the house during the ensuing days and left 3 pleading messages. Lena didn't return any of their calls. She did not speak with Eva. She hadn't talked to Irene. She rose and shuffled to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of sun tea that was 2 weeks old. She set the glass down and forgot about it. She almost reached for the phone. She needed to talk to somebody, but she had no idea who she might have called. She was mortified, no longer angry. Stupidly, she took the bait. She realized within a few days that the federal agent lied to her. She destroyed her relationship with her sister and her niece by jumping the gun and talking to Eva before she realized it was bullshit. Well, at least the part about Poppy having been killed. She herself remembered reading the autopsy details months after her husband's death. A bruise was noted near the base of his neck. When Agent Waltham told her that Ben was struck with a blunt force object about an hour before his death, which led to a hematoma, which caused the aneurysm, she was so shook up she barely remembered that she already knew about the blow, and it didn't occur an hour before he died. It was 2 days before, from slipping outside in the rain. The day after Halloween, Ben wanted to bring inside the little hay bale and staked muslin ghosts from the yard so they wouldn't get soaked. As he raced toward the house from the garage, he slipped on some wet leaves and fell, hitting the side of his neck on the brick curbing. "Son of a bitch!" he shouted. She remembered distinctly. A bruise popped up almost immediately. Obviously, someone at the FBI later saw the autopsy and those notes, and maybe initially they believed something was fishy, but she understood now that the only charges they were going after Poppy with were financial. He would have already been arrested if he was going to be charged with murder. She was manipulated, duped. Her response deliberately elicited by the agent that visited her that night in the parking garage. She felt numb and stupid. She spied the clock above the stove and realized it was only 6 a.m. She stumbled back to bed, and Ben sighed in the mattress. She could hear the hum of white noise outside, electricity lines, and somewhere a car engine was idling. The world outside this closed-in house was slowly coming to life. She suddenly realized that the person she wanted to call earlier was Ben. Ben, who held all the answers. Ben, who knew the truth. But Ben was dead almost 3 years now, and his secrets had died with him. She couldn't ask her husband a damn thing. Lena suddenly sat bolt upright in bed, her fingers gripping the mattress edge. Benjamin W. Bierman was dead. Her husband stepped off this mortal coil and took everything he knew with him. All that was left of him now were her memories and a few personal items which she'd never looked through. She slid from the bed and across the hardwood floor. The few clothes of Ben's that remained at the house were hanging in garment bags toward the rear of the master closet. His papers were there as well, stored in shoeboxes on the shelves. Lena pulled the string from the overhead light and squinted, her eyes adjusting. Confetti of dust twirled in the light. She began to rummage through pockets of sweaters, jackets, jeans, through shoes, pulling down box after box. Once all of Ben's things were off the shelves and upon the floor, she sat cross-legged and began to plunder. It was past 8 a.m. when she found the bank register. $25,000 was in that account only 4 weeks before Ben's death. In an account with only Ben's name, not hers. A new account at a different bank than their joint accounts. It was sitting here all the while. There was a small white envelope taped inside the register, a silver key inside, a safe deposit box key. She stood up, her knees shaky, and jumped over the pile to get to the dresser. There she found the manila envelope in her sock drawer that contained Ben's driver's license, passport, their old joint bank statements, and his death certificate. She'd shoved those all away, out of sight, the New Year's after Ben died. Now she looked at everything over and over. 25 grand hadn't come from their joint accounts, which she changed to sole ownership a month after her husband's death. No large sums were taken out of those accounts during the weeks prior to Ben's death either. She grabbed a tank top and a pair of light corduroys from the dresser and slipped them on, then brushed her teeth. She tucked the deposit slip and security deposit key into her pocket. It was 8:39 a.m. when she sprinted along the driveway toward her car. The bank opened at 9 a.m., and she sat in their parking lot for more than 10 minutes until she could fly through the door. She sat face to face with the banker and provided Ben's death certificate and her driver's license and his, and received permission to see the records of this account. On September 20th, 1995, her husband brought a cashier's check for $50,000 to this bank, and with it, he opened a new checking account. She requested a copy of the check from the main branch and was told it would take a week, but the banker said that the check was from something called ANI Financial. Half of the money deposited was withdrawn in cash a week later. She didn't find the September statements at the house, only the October one, which didn't reflect the initial amount or the withdrawal, merely the $25,000 that remained. "May I see the security deposit box, please?" Lena breathlessly requested. Banker excused herself and went to retrieve the box. Lena's heart was racing, and her hands wouldn't stay still. When the banker returned with the metal box, the women opened it in unison. There were a few items inside. A stack of $100 bills equaling $25,000, along with the original deposit slip of $50,000, the withdrawal slip for $25,000 on September 29th, and the September statement. There was also a square of paper, a note on yellow legal paper folded in fourths. The note was written in Ben's handwriting and read, "For Eva and the baby." After she walked out of the bank, Lena sat in her car for a long time. The early sun beat through the windshield, and light traces of sweat pooled up at the back of her neck and under her breasts. Ben knew that Eva was pregnant. Eva swore to Lena that she never told Ben, but Lena surmised maybe he somehow had guessed. Eva was 3 months along on the day of the funeral, the day she told her older sister. Lena remembered feeling mortified when she heard the news, and for months after. She felt dense, that she should have known, that she would have known if she'd spent any damn time with her husband during the last month of his life, rather than letting Benjamin go alone night after night to her grandfather's. So Ben got $50,000 somewhere and stashed half of it in cash in a deposit box and half in a new secret bank account. The money put into the box was meant for Eva, to help support her and their child. What, Lena desperately wanted to know, was he planning to do with the other half? Did Poppy give Ben this money? Were the feds right? Was her grandfather secretly aware that her husband had had an affair with Eva and impregnated her? What kind of arrangement could the two have conspired on together? If the FBI thought that Poppy gave Ben the money, Poppy must be connected to that check, right? But what the hell was ANI Financial? The name rang no bells. She suddenly remembered, in the fog of Ben's shiva, one person reaching out in sympathy. Milton Greenberg, Poppy's former investment advisor. He and his wife showed up at the funeral and at shiva. Milton came over soon after she arrived at Poppy's to say a few words. She was standing by the dining room table, by Beatrice's portrait. Lena couldn't remember his exact words. They were kind, they were consoling, they were solicitous from what she could recall. Yet there was something else she heard later that afternoon. What was that? She tried to remember the fragments of that day. It was maybe 2 hours after they came back from B'nai David when her mother gave her the pills. Lena was in the kitchen, watching Carmen setting another helping of chopped liver and crudité on the table, when Irene came over. She wrapped her arm around Lena's waist, who stood leaning against the refrigerator. "Do you want to lay down?" Irene asked, and her daughter just nodded. Irene reached for her purse upon the kitchen counter and pulled from it a tiny decorative pillbox. She handed Lena a pair of Valium with a cup of decaf. "Drink up, love," she soothed, her hand caressing small circles upon her daughter's lower back. Lena swallowed the pills and kissed Irene, but wasn't quite ready to lie down. She tried distracting herself, scoping around the condo for trash clustered in paper plates. When the sedatives kicked in, she felt her legs turn rubbery and began to make her way toward the bedroom, Poppy's bedroom. As she walked past the etagere near the hall, she saw Milton and Mrs. Greenberg. They were huddled in conversation. Lena struggled now to remember. What had she heard them say? There was something strange, something... She could clearly picture the shelving, with small ivory figurines upon it, the wood framing around the hall doorway, the beige carpet and brass light switches. The older couple, whispering, facing away from her. They did not notice her standing behind them. "How much longer? You're not going to," the woman hissed at her husband. 50 grand. Delay us by 6 months or longer. Have to wait for. Along with most everything else that was spoken or done that horrible day, other than her sister's bombshell, this brief overheard conversation flitted past Lena without sinking in. Lena remembered that day for the news about the baby and forgot about the rest of it. It was all overshadowed by the news that her sister was pregnant, that her husband had been unfaithful, that someone else was having the baby that she could not have herself. Now she recalled hearing the "have to wait" comment and immediately thinking, wow, these people are rude. They can't wait to get out of here. Followed by 50 grand. What's that? She heard it. She continued on her way down the hall into her grandfather's bedroom, and then she forgot about the exchange. In Poppy's bedroom, she spied his robe and slippers and began to shrug out from her suit. She put on the robe and sat up on the bed, feeling the Valium and its effects rise up through her body. Then her sister came into the room. Eva stood facing the bed and told her sister her news. Eva cried. Lena was frozen, rugged and numb and confused. Tears eventually began to flow, and soon everything drifted away. She had no bad dreams that night as she slept in her grandfather's bed. She remembered virtually nothing of the day before, nothing anyone asked of her, and nothing she witnessed, save for her sister's proclamation. 13 hours later, she woke to a slow flash of movement around her and found Carmen putting laundry away in Poppy's dresser. Now, sweat trickling down her neck, she strained to remember the Greenbergs' conversation. What had they been talking about? What exactly were they waiting for? And was the 50 grand they mentioned in any way connected to the 50 grand she discovered that morning? Was Ben's death, the Greenbergs, and that money somehow tied together? She added up in her memory everything she knew about Milton, his wife. The mention of 50,000 seemed too coincidental not to explore. Milton had been Poppy's investment broker since the early 70s, shortly after Poppy got out of his business holdings. Lena understood through overheard conversations that Poppy essentially bought his way out of the organization. He divested himself to the powers that be, and not much was left over. There were accountants who helped Poppy hang on to what he had left, as well as helping him liquefy a few other holdings. A few years later, he began to see Milton Greenberg, who helped Poppy grow his portfolio substantially. Over the years, she overheard Poppy say that Milton was a pure genius who doubled his capital in short order, encouraging Poppy to invest in new ideas and technologies. This was during the mid-70s when most investors played it safe. Poppy mentioned names such as DuPont and Apple and Con Ed. He praised Milton's fiduciary talents to everyone, including her husband, she recalled. She remembered that Milt had a daughter and a couple of grandkids. Their daughter died of an autoimmune disorder several years ago. Their grandchildren moved with their father out of state a year or so before Ben died. The Greenbergs moved away too, after New Year's of '96 and after Ben's funeral, sometime early that next spring, if she remembered right. Was it North Carolina? She thought she heard someone joke about Milton dedicating himself to his golf game. Was that where their grandkids lived? She had no idea. She simply heard that he retired and moved away. But Ben had mentioned Milt to her at least once. He'd been thinking of investing in a beverage company and muttered something along the lines of, "I wonder if Milt would recommend it." He didn't specifically say that he was working with Milt, but suddenly she remembered a slip of paper she found that morning. Inside the pocket of one of his blazers, she discovered a parking validation slip from the Penobscot building. Milton had officed out of the Penobscot. Lena sat in her car, white-knuckling the steering wheel, tickling rivulets of perspiration running along her belly, trying to put together the pieces. Ben slept with her sister. Eva got pregnant. Milton Greenberg was Poppy's investment broker for 20-plus years. He had a stellar reputation. He was trusted by the family. He came to Ben's damned funeral, for God's sake. Ben must have visited Milt, Lena determined. It couldn't have been more than a couple months before he died, since the parking stub was still in his jacket pocket. Ben later opened a private bank account and safety deposit box. He deposited $50,000 in his new account from a business she did not recognize, ANI Financial. Ben died suddenly, about 5 or 6 weeks later. Milt and his wife had a strange conversation after Ben's funeral, in Lena's hearing, although they were clueless that she was in earshot. Milt moved away a few months after the funeral. She didn't think her grandfather had heard from him since. The pieces began to float around one another, toward one another, slowly touching, coming together. ANI Financial. Lena suddenly remembered Milton's wife's name. It was Anita. Ah, damn it. Thunder struck, and overheating in that warm car, she rolled down her window. Ben didn't embezzle money, and Poppy hadn't given it to her husband. It was suddenly crystal clear. Ben got the money from Milton, from Poppy's investment broker. Ben must have gone to Milt quite a while ago and was investing with his firm. Poppy frequently told people that Greenberg was a genius with money. Milt's business name was something like Equity Assets Financial something or other, something completely nondescript. So this wasn't a regular dividend cut from Equity Assets coffers. This was something else. This was a cashier's check. But the feds were claiming that Poppy was running a Ponzi scheme, and Ben somehow profited from it. How was this possible? Could Milt have been embezzling from Poppy? Lena thought that made no sense. Poppy had been profitable in his dealings with Milt, and nobody with even half a brain would rob someone like Poppy, not with his history and connections. Maybe the $50,000 was a bribe. Did Ben figure out that Milt was doing something he shouldn't? Demanded money to keep quiet? All the times Poppy had bragged about his investment broker came back to Lena. My broker must be a magician. Look how soon we doubled, tripled, quadrupled that investment. Go see Milt. He'll work wonders with your portfolio. I trust him with my money and my life. But the comment Lena recalled most, at this moment was when Poppy told her some years ago, "I let Milt keep the statements so long as the checks keep coming." Poppy never wanted to have records around, legal or financial. It went back to his early history running from the law. Poppy went to an investment broker that would handle everything, make his client good money, but keep the records secured. Poppy went to Milt's office those days at least once a month, Lena recalled. A picture appeared to Lena, conjured up as though a projector had started to play on her windshield. Ben going to meet with Milt, maybe a year earlier. Surely there were monies removed from the Biermans' joint accounts at some point previously, something Lena wasn't aware of or didn't ask questions about. Small amounts, maybe, a few hundred at a stretch. Ben, like Poppy, was happy. His investment was growing. He went to see Milt once or twice a year, and Milt happily showed Ben a statement showing the rates of return. They're good. Nothing to ever ask any questions about. Maybe Milt printed off a statement, but Ben failed to share it with his wife. If he kept it, he did not leave it at home. It made sense to Lena that her husband might have wanted to surprise her. Maybe he was saving for fertility treatments and wanted to bring the money to his wife when she would be most thrilled to receive it, when it could do the most good. So he chose not to tell her about the portfolio Milt set up for him. And he didn't bring the statements home. He took the statements to his office. Of course, she realized. The office that told her after Ben's sudden passing that she could come pick up his effects from his desk any time. She did go to Ben's office around December 1st, 3 weeks after the funeral. The human resources manager handed her a banker's box filled with odds and ends. She remembered half-empty rolls of Mentos and a necktie clip and old tiger stubs. There were papers, too, but she hadn't cared about that stuff. She only wanted one thing, their wedding photograph in its crystal frame, the one that now sat at her bedside. She took the picture and left everything else. The statements must have been there. Someone probably shredded them a year or more ago. It's probably where the bank statements were still going. Nobody bothered to tell her that Ben still had mail coming to his office. No one ever put in a change of address for the bank. But Ben at some point went to Milt. He must have been stressed because he realized he'd just knocked up his wife's sister. He probably worried what Poppy would do to him. So Ben visited his investment broker to withdraw some of his earnings as protection. Protection for the baby, but a way out for himself as well if he required it. Milt cut her husband a check for $50,000. Milt gave Ben money as requested, not right on the spot, of course. Lena could picture the advisor, with his liver-spotted hands, seated at his desk in a suit 2 sizes too big. "Come back later this afternoon. I'll get you a cashier's check." But as Lena understood now, Milt was robbing Peter to pay Paul. He'd obviously been doing it for decades. He was smart. He wouldn't rob for Michael Ashner or his grandson-in-law. He paid them handsomely, so they'd never know they weren't investing in a house of cards. If you're going to screw someone over, it wasn't going to be Michael Poppy Ashner or anyone close to the man. No, you're just going to use his money to start your bankroll. God knows how many people got sucked into this scheme. Even when the Greenbergs left town, they made sure there was enough money for Poppy to open a new investment account elsewhere. Wherever they were now, they were probably still terrified of the old man getting to them. Ben must have been scared. He couldn't tell his wife what was happening. He probably couldn't even have told Eva. His half of the $50,000 was insurance. If he needed to escape, he could. But he still thought to leave enough for Eva and the baby to get by. It was only happenstance that he died tragically a few weeks later, before the baby was even showing. Lena felt truly sad for her late husband. Poor Ben, who went over to his grandfather-in-law's house several nights a week because it was the only place someone would cook him a decent meal, a meal he didn't microwave alone. Sad Ben, who moved to Detroit to become a hotshot sports agent and never rose above middling status. Benjamin Bierman, who made the mistake of stooping his sister-in-law and the bigger mistake of going to a shyster for financial help. Her poor Ben, who would never be able to redeem himself. He would never meet his own daughter. Now his life was being pilfered by government agents as leverage against an old and frail gentleman who, yes, once used to be a criminal. Poor, poor Benjamin. And with this, Lena knew that her grandfather was innocent. Not just innocent of murder, but fully innocent. Maybe once upon a time, Poppy had been a gangster, and maybe even today he was no angel, but he didn't have her husband killed and he wasn't a thief. But Milt made damn sure that he looked like one, she understood. Milt set this up for Poppy to take the fall and then disappeared. That was probably how he thought he'd protect himself from his possibly still dangerous client. Lena began weeping, knowing that her sister was now trapped in the same web of lies that she'd miraculously just seen through. She turned on the ignition. She might not be able to break through to her sister, but she could reach Poppy and let her grandfather know that she knew the truth. As she screeched to a stop on the street outside his condo, her stomach churned when she saw 2 sheriff's cars and 3 unmarked vehicles staggered around his driveway. She jumped from the car, sprinting toward the men. They were walking up the gate ahead of her, toward the front door. 8 or 9 men in dark suits and blue uniforms. Poppy stood at the door looking out the shaded glass. He was dressed, not in his usual tracksuit and comfortable shoes, but in a suit and a clumsily knotted tie. He had dressed as though for his own funeral for the past week, expecting that knock to come any day. Today was just the day it actually had. "Don't say anything," Lena shouted at her grandfather, stumbling to push past the arresting officers. They wasted no manpower in holding her at bay and placing Michael Poppy Ashner under arrest. The look on their faces was one of shared jubilation, of victory. They got their man. The man who once felt like the king of Detroit. The man who switched allegiance to the Sicilians before the Purple Gang disbanded, and again between rival families when it served his needs. This 87-year-old great-grandfather being arrested was finally going to pay for his crimes, and the officers that surrounded him could barely contain their satisfaction. As they locked their cuffs around his narrow wrists, Lena heard Carmen bellowing from inside the house. The officers wouldn't let Lena touch her grandfather. They held her clumsily back. Poppy's dark eyes blinked in the morning sunlight as he was led out toward the street. An officer read him his rights. "You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed for you. You have the right." The men released Lena, and suddenly Carmen burst through the front door like a tumbleweed from Hades. Her thin hair was askew and spiked outwards. Her eyes blazed, and a string of cuss words, the depths of which Lena never heard before from her, issued forth. But the officers did not pause. When Poppy was past the swinging gate, Carmen began to wail and weep. Lena put her arm around the older woman's shoulders. "Don't," she soothed. "But look at him," Carmen cried. "You didn't have to cuff him, you motherfucks." The women stood together, one on fire and the other as still as stone, as Poppy was tucked into the rear seat of a squad car and driven away. The neighbors began to creep out as well, gawking over their hedges with coffee mugs in hand. A black federal agent named Mitchell handed Lena his business card. "He won't be bonded out. You'll be able to pick Mr. Ashner up in a couple hours. Come down to the 12th Precinct at 7 Mile and Woodward by the golf course. Call your attorney." Lena watched the procession of cars drive away and waited until the seething, shaking woman beside her was still. "Let's go inside."